Software coach Dagna Bieda returns. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm super stoked to be here again.
I'm glad to have you back. How has things been going with you?
Pretty well. I'm really excited about the new thing that I'm actually focusing on right now, which is writing a book for software engineers, software developers, people who are interested in tuning into the software industry. So that's fun.
So, is this book about like how people can improve their prospects, or what's exactly the content of the book?
I've been coaching people for over 4 years right now, and as I've been going through this process with like multiple different people from various backgrounds, there were like common patterns that kept coming up and common roadblocks, like things like imposter syndrome, burnout, feeling stuck in your career and not understanding why, even if you have all that technical knowledge that should take you to that next level. So then, that making you kind of like an invisible subject matter expert being passed on for promotions, or other patterns like misunderstanding what leadership is about and how, whether you're choosing a managerial or technical track, there's a lot of common skills that you need to develop regardless of which track you choose. So like I decided to kind of dump all those patterns that I observed that keep coming up again and again and again and put them in a book so it becomes much more accessible for people.
Oh, that's awesome. How has the process been of actually writing the book?
I gotta say, it's pretty interesting. I've never done that in the past. And so, like, just sitting down and writing things, getting to that point whenever you sit down and start writing, it's kind of like, as I remember when I was learning programming. It feels like really tough to get yourself to a point where you actually sit down in front of your computer and start doing it. But once you get in the flow, it keeps on going.
Absolutely. When can we expect the book, and what is it called?
Fingers crossed it's going to come out this year. I am shooting for like September October timeframe. In terms of a title, because a lot of the things that I notice and I help my clients with are related to their beliefs in what I call internal mental programming. um, the title might be something like that. I'm not exactly set on a particular topic yet because I noticed that a lot of books for engineers, for developers in the industry, what they address is actually the technical piece, how to learn a new programming language or another tech stack. And they're very technical, but there's not that many that talk about mindset specifically for the engineering tech industry.
Absolutely. So you kind of mentioned burnout. What are some of the other mental blocks that hold people back?
Imposter syndrome, right? So
Hmm.
like not having the confidence to step up, speak out, and talk about yourself, whether it's in a meeting setting where you want to maybe interject a conversation but feel like, oh no, what if the questions that I have are just stupid, right? Or imposter syndrome when you're entering a conversation or having a presentation with someone who's, let's say, either more experienced than you are, or for example has like a more traditional background. So like if someone is from coming from a background of coding boot camp, or a self-taught developer, that often comes up as well, like, oh, I'm not as smart because I didn't go to school and I don't have a CS degree, which is not true. But the imposter syndrome makes it feel as such, right? And another thing too is kind of like a mindset shift too in the book, which is what is it that is like this healthy mindset with which you can grow with your career, instead of fighting the imposter syndrome, instead of faking it till you make it, because that creates a lot of stress unnecessarily as well, right? So these are some of the examples. Another common roadblock obstacle is lack of opportunities. I noticed that, software engineering, even though at this point in time is kind of challenging economy because of all the layoffs that literally just happened in the past 2 quarters, the reality is that there's so many opportunities, but a lot of the time as an individual, you have to kind of like take the ownership of your career and try to either seek out the opportunities or try and create them for yourself. So the book will mention those topics as well, um, in order for you to be able to step out of your comfort zone, step into that new role, level up in your career, essentially.
So I know, like with this challenging economy, a lot of people, they're facing a lot of rejection. With your coaching, are you able to kind of help them avoid getting psyched out?
Absolutely. I mean, rejection is really difficult, in terms of how you feel about it, right? Applying for hundreds of job positions, job listings is something that can be very dreadful. And it's kind of like what I mentioned about writing a book. Like, it can be really hard for someone to just sit down and start applying, right? All of a sudden, binging a Netflix show for the umpteenth time feels like a better choice to do, right?
Mhm.
And that's procrastination at play. Whenever we procrastinate on things, what happens is we're trying to make ourselves feel good in the moment, and we're looking for that instant reward instead of doing something really hard. Now, one way to work with rejection is switching up your perspective, right? And I love what Jack Canfield had to say about that particular topic. I heard it from him, I learned it from him, is that rejection doesn't really exist. Because when I ask for something and I don't get it, I'm exactly in the same spot where I was before I asked for that thing, right?
Mhm.
The problem is that we set expectations for ourselves. A lot of engineers I work with are kind of perfectionists in the sense that, it's like an all or nothing attitude where either I apply for a job and I get it in that one interview because it goes perfectly, or why even bother trying? So that's really the mental programming, the way you think, that will either help you take valuable action, in this case, applying for an interview, or will stop you from taking action whatsoever. And it's really the thoughts that you kind of tell yourself. In something that I work with my clients on that's really key is the mindfulness, hence mindful dev as the name of the
Mhm.
company, and awareness of what are those thoughts that are coming up, what are the patterns that keep showing up on repeat, that kind of makes you drive like on an autopilot. How the way I work with my clients is like, how do we take your life off of cruise control and grab the steering wheel and go exactly where you want to go? For some people that means stepping up and maybe becoming a team lead, an engineer manager, an architect. For some others it might mean stepping outside of being employed in the 9 to 5 realm and stepping into entrepreneurship. For some others, it's realizing that they need a break, that they need to ask for maybe a sabbatical or put in a request for 2 3 weeks of time off if they have never taken time off, and reshuffling the priorities so they can start prioritizing themselves rather than the work they've been in. So it's really different ways, but at the end of the day everything comes back to the way your mind is thinking. Now I call it legacy programming, mental programming. And the reason I talk about it being legacy, because it's kind of like whenever you enter to a new company, to a new team, what's typically your role? You have to maintain code that someone else has written, right?
Mhm.
So as an adult, you'll find yourself that you have this patterns of thinking that you didn't necessarily consciously choose to think to operate that particular way, but the way you grew up, the way life happened to you, and what you observed and experienced in your life, that put that programming in your mind and in your body. Hence it's a legacy mental programming. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Can you tell us about some of the bigger wins that you've gotten for your clients recently?
Yes. So I've had some recent client that told me that she got past the imposter syndrome. And that was a really big thing for her because she was coming into her role from that coding, bootcamp coding background. So she wasn't feeling fully secure. And one of the things that we noticed for her specifically, for example, was that she was from from her previous career, she was bringing in a lot of valuable skills that she could now use for her job. So essentially, a lot of the times, things that are naturally easy for you as an individual, you will tend to diminish how good you're in those things because they're easy, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of the time when I work with my clients, it's we have this as a human beings bias towards making hard things seem like they're more valuable. But if something comes easy to us, it's like, I guess it's easy for everyone, right? Because it's easy
Mm.
for me, but that's not the case. So having that third party perspective is really helpful in terms of elevating, like, or understanding how you actually compare against your peers within your company, your team, or within industry as a whole. So that was one major win that I that I want to report. And then other than that, it's helping people, like you said, like a lot of people are applying for new jobs, getting out of PIP situation or applying for jobs, after someone has been let go. So I've had a client recently who was unfortunately in a situation that he's been let go, but he reported that with the coaching that we've done together, it was so much easier for him to just sit down and apply and see the interviews as practice, as
Mm.
stepping stones. So that anxiety that was really connected to sitting down and going through an interview was gone. And he found that incredibly helpful. Now he's still looking, but now it's so much easier to go through the motion because that fear isn't there anymore. It's so much easier to sit down and do the job. Now, Kevin, I'm kind of curious. Did you had any experience with ruffling or the shakedown, should say, in the past 2 quarters? Like, what's have been your experience as you speak with different people?
Like some of the roadblocks and things they're undergoing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the big thing is, especially for new developers, there's so much rejection. Um, it's there's a fear component, and then there's also the component of, am I ever gonna get past you know being rejected? Like once, a lot of people, if they're rejected over and over, it starts affecting their self-esteem. So how do you keep going in this process without taking it personal? I think that's one of the big things, because like now the software industry is very hard to get into. So how
That's
do
true.
I so
That's true. For someone that is fresh to the industry, it's much harder than it was a year or two ago. It's not necessarily the case for people who have been in it for a while. But yeah, you're right. For newcomers, it's a tough market at this point in time.
And I think another thing is like the financial aspect, because a lot of people, they've been paying all this money for boot camps, and the price of everything is just shooting up. So how do you avoid getting psyched out when you're not finding that job as fast as you want, or maybe you got laid off, and now even if you're a senior developer, you're looking for a new job, but the new job probably isn't going to pay the same as the old one. So how do you stay afloat mentally, when you're not making as much money, you're not as able to pay the bills? I think those are like, some of the tough issues.
That's very true. One thing that I can recommend, and I know it kind of goes against the grain of like the general recommendation out there, but having worked with various software engineers, having been a software engineer myself, I can tell you that it's interesting because, like, in order to layoff proof your career at this point in time, for a lot of engineers who have had experience under their belt, it means focusing on people skills, clear communication, collaboration, proactivity, and ownership. Understanding the business that you work for, right? That having like a business acumen, and also self marketing so that people know what kind of value you bring and see you as the professional you are. And what's interesting, these skills are typically what's missing. They're not on like a typical engineer's radar, right? So when someone finds themselves being let go, as a software engineer, or AI, data, anything related, QA engineer, related to programming, I highly recommend focusing on those skills. One thing you'll notice, everything that I mentioned is um, very much related to how engineers work, in terms like working in a group, in a team setting. And so if someone is has invested in their development skills and they're having a hard time getting a job as a software engineer, one way to pivot would be to find a job in which they can hone those particular skills while continuing to remember the programming piece, because within a year or two it's going to be again easier to get a job as an engineer. The reason why is technology is everywhere, right? And it's we're finding more and more uses for technology, and so the demands for programmers is not going to stop. you know it's not like, oh, we have X amount of engineers now, we don't need any more, so nobody will get a job ever. No, that's not how the market works.
Hmm.
Plus, a lot of people will be exiting their jobs as well, to retire, to start their businesses, to pivot into a different role. And so if you're someone who is currently looking for jobs, one of the things that you can add to your skill set are those things I mentioned a moment ago, who help engineers actually layoff proof them in their career. So at that point, having all those skills, the communication, collaboration, proactivity, knowing the business, marketing, ownership, once you have that developed and you add your programming skills to that tech stack, you'll be able to move through career ranks really rapidly, really, really quickly.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Yeah, people skills, that's one thing that really sets you apart because, like you mentioned, it's not taught in boot camp, it's not really taught anywhere. So, like, how do people step their people skills up? How do they step their networking up to really set themselves apart?
A lot of it is awareness, on, like, for example, in terms of communication specifically, is you could consider, like, what is your cultural upbringing. And I know that that was one of the topics we wanted to discuss today, but how you grow up, like, in terms of a culture that you grew up in. So it could be, you know um the family that you grew up with, the country, the culture that you grew up with, that will affect your communication skills, right? So one thing that I highly recommend is, there's this free tool. It's called Hofstede model, and it allows for comparing different countries, and it tells you kind of like general overview on how in a specific country, how people value certain things. And the reason I'm talking about it is because, for example, if you value order, or collaboration as a nation, you're going to, for example, in a conversation, wait until you're called to speak up, because that's how you were raised. That's the norm in your mind, right? But then if you try to find a job in a company where you're required to be more individualized, more taking ownership, and like speaking up for yourself, you know that kind of behavior might not be on your radar at all. So like having that awareness of your cultural background and how that slips into how you communicate with other people can be extremely beneficial. The second thing is, there are different modes of communication. We have aggressive, passive aggressive communication, and assertive communication. So the column you want to be in, the way you want to communicate with other people, is assertive. And I like to say that being assertive in communication is this kind of gentle confidence, where on one hand, you acknowledge what the person you're speaking with brings to the table and the value that they bring to the table. But at the same time, you're very firm with respectfully stating your boundaries, your limits, your expectations, without like bringing blame to a conversation or without pointing fingers. So, assertive communication is a big skill in terms of communication. Excuse me. that really really helps.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting point that you brought up. In like some cultures, more the Eastern cultures, I would say, it's all about the collective, and there's a more of a rigid hierarchy. Like you don't go against your elders, and then when you come to the West, it's more individualistic. So, how, how
Exactly.
how do you transfer from like somebody who's used to being passive to being more like individualistic, where okay, now I have to take ownership, I have to speak up. Like how do you help clients make that transition?
First, getting aware that what is happening is, you're that you're operating from that mode. So the moment you know that's a thing, you're going to be more in tune in catching yourself in those situations and being prepared next time that it happens, right? Because what happens too is like whenever we're in a conversation and our cultural upbringing, you know, is impacting how we communicate, we also put this filter that assigns the meaning of how other people act and what they say, right? So, for example, I grew up in Poland, and the way we speak in Poland is very direct, but at the same time, the way the conversation flows, like it's okay to interrupt each other. And you'll see that in a lot of European nations. In fact, every time I go home now, I am so not used to that way of speaking anymore that when my mom interrupts me all the time, it just drives me crazy. But that's how I grew up. So when I moved here the first time around in one of my jobs, this was a major problem. People would tell me when I ask for feedback, for objective feedback, Dagna, you sound arrogant. You sound rude. And I had like the best intentions in my heart. So without getting that kind of feedback, I would have not been aware that, okay, this is something I brought from home, from my family of origin, from my culture. And now I am, coming across totally not how I want to come across in order to, keep my job or get a promotion. So, awareness, getting feedback from other people if you're in a position where you can get feedback. Another thing is, I remember clearly, and I mentioned this to someone pretty recently, that, at that point in time, I was not really open to that kind of feedback. And I needed time in order to open myself to the possibility that maybe it's me and not the world around me. So at that point in time, being a minority in tech, it felt like everybody around me was biased, right? And it felt like blaming the bias was easier than acknowledging that I needed to improve my communication skills. Because when I realized it was my communication skills, I took some tests, it came out, I discussed it with close people to me that I was open at that point in time to take that feedback from them. I was like, oh, okay. I had no idea, right? So what I'm trying to say is being open to that kind of feedback, and then gathering that feedback, requesting it, asking other people, that will help tremendously. Because in order to fix any sort of problem, you need to define that problem. You need to know what it is that's not currently working, right?
I think that's a really important point you mentioned, that you realize that it wasn't everybody else, it was me. I had something to fix. I believe like once you put the accountability on yourself, now you have the power to change. But if you're always saying it's somebody else, then you're waiting for them to change, and if they never change, you're always going to be stuck in the same place.
Exactly, exactly. And at the end of the day, if we think about it, like, what is it that we can control? We cannot control other people's behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what we can control is how we show up in a conversation, the boundaries that we draw, the expectations that we clearly communicate, our skills, how respectful we are to other people, and also how we interpret their behavior, right? So, for example, if you're in a conversation, um, and someone gives you constructive feedback that kind of stings a little in the moment, right? Your interpretation, the meaning that you assign to what this person is doing could be, ah, oh, he thinks I'm an idiot. He thinks I don't know what I'm doing. He thinks blah, 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 all the negative things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where in reality, what happens if you change the interpretation to, oh, okay, I guess I could improve that particular thing. All right, I'll work on that. You see how that changed the dynamic, how that took the whole pressure away, and it's
Hmm.
all really within our control how we assign the meaning to what happens around us.
Exactly. So like once you started changing how you reacted to things like criticism, did you notice people's like reaction to you change? Like,
Yes, yes. And that kind of, it's a ripple effect. The moment you realize what your autopilot programming is and how you act, what are the patterns that you act with, the moment you start changing those actions, those behaviors, the world starts responding differently. The feedback that you get from outside world changes because you start showing up differently.
absolutely. Like I know something that a lot of senior developers, especially in the programming profession, we're kind of introverts. We don't necessarily want to lead, but as you start moving up the ranks, team lead, architect, you start having to deal with more people. So, like, what are some of the ways you help people get from being introverted and focus on their internal thoughts to start being able to consider and leading others?
So, one way that I think is really good to think about in terms of being introverted or extroverted is how you rejuvenate and where you get your energy from
Mm.
rather than, day to day interactions with people. Because introverts, with that attention to thoughts and what comes up internally, are really great people leaders, right? Because of that thoughtfulness. However, it all depends on that meaning that they assign to the interactions with other people, right? So, in terms of getting the energy, when you're an introvert, you're going to relax and rejuvenate whenever you're alone, reading a book, taking a walk in nature. If you're an extrovert, you're going to rejuvenate and create that internal energy and excitement for yourself whenever you're surrounded with other people, whenever you're part of something bigger, whenever you're a part of a group and you're hanging out together. So it's really about how you rest and relax rather than what is your interaction with other people, right? So for anyone, whether they're introverted, extroverted, you know, one thing that I highly recommend is adopting this kind of mindset shift that I also learned from Jack Canfield, which is at any point in time, anyone is doing the best they can given their skills, their knowledge, and the awareness that they have in order to fulfill their needs. They could never do anything different. So whenever you're coming to a conversation with kind of that kind of mental attitude, and let's say someone has an emotional outburst, like you could take it personally and get really upset, or you could realize, hey, maybe this person's behavior has nothing to do with me or a conversation. They just have something going on in their personal life and they're not managing that well, you know? So the moment you can kind of observe what's happening without that judgment towards yourself, that gives a lot of freedom. And also, in terms of, I feel like personal growth, whether you become, you step into the leadership positions or not, it just makes life so much easier to detach from that emotional baggage that other people around us may carry. Another way to think about it too, though, if you do step into a leadership position, now you're managing people and you're not happy about having to manage like internal conflicts or whatnot, giving people the benefit of the doubt and seeing how they're trying the best they can will make you a better people leader as well. Because once you realize that the conflict happens because of miscommunication, because one person comes from a cultural upbringing where they expect to be asked before they speak, right? Which is like a lot of my clients that either grew up in in Asian countries or grew up in immigrant families. That's typically how they think. Like you have to wait until you're asked. Um, and then they have this another person who comes from Eastern Europe, from Poland, for example, who keeps interrupting, speaking up, and being like arrogant, sounding arrogant, right? Like managing these two personalities in order to these two people to get along well is pointing out, hey, to the first person, we expect more proactivity from you, so it's okay to speak up without being asked. And from the other person, you have to practice your assertiveness skills, because how you're coming across is not beneficial to your personal growth, to your growth, and whatever that person is trying to accomplish at that point in time. So having that awareness and understanding that, again, at any point in time, people are doing the best they can given the information, awareness, and skills that they have in order to meet their needs. So they might be missing the awareness, they just don't know how they're coming across, which was my case. They might be missing the skills, like I was missing the assertive communication skills at that point in time. Or there might be something going on in their life that they can't, they're just not able to meet their needs. Maybe they have a sick parent that they're taking care of, or a child, or something's going on in their personal life that makes them prioritize everything around them but not taking care of themselves. And that's kind of another aspect of burnout too that I see is very common. It's really critical to schedule on the calendar the time for you to take care of yourself, because the more you take care of yourself, the more capacity you have to deal with everything that happens around you.
No, absolutely. So I know like one of the hot topics these days is AI. Have you had any of your clients bring up concerns about AI? Like, how do I prepare for potential job loss, or how do I adapt to be able to exist in this world where it seems like AI is taking over everything?
I feel like with chat gpt being like super popular right now, one thing that is really critical is that that kind of intelligence is still relatively simple, in the sense that it won't pick up on nuances that humans can, right? It will not be good in managing people. It
Hmm.
will not be good in collaborating with people. There's a lot of the things that people are uniquely equipped still to do, and I don't think that AI will take that. There are things that AI can do. For example, you can ask, ChatGPT for like a code snippet, right? But if you're dealing with like legacy code base that has a lot of spaghetti in it, even if you copy and paste what ChatGPT gives you, like you still have to use your skills in order to put it in the right place so it actually, doesn't damage the rest of the code base and it fits whatever's there. Now, it might be, you know, seem like an easy task, but it does require human intelligence to kind of understand how to piece all things together.
Absolutely. I think that's all the major questions that I had for you. But if somebody wants to work with you, what does that process look like, and how do they reach out to you?
The best way is to go to my website, themindfuldev.com. And on that website, what I have is a case study. So the case study essentially walks you through, it's a free video that you can watch, and it explains the process that I follow with my clients. And once you watch the case study, if you're interested in speaking to me in person, you absolutely can. We schedule a strategy call, hop on that call, dive deep. The first thing that I want to do on that call is have like a deep understanding of what it is that is your situation and how I can help. If I know that my skill set is not going to help you achieve what it is that you're trying to do, then we wrap up and move on. Or I can send you somewhere that might be a better fit if I know of a particular person or a program. But if, the issues that you come to me with sound like I can help, I explain how that looks like, and we take it from there.
Sounds good. I definitely appreciate you for coming back on again. We'll have to have you back. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Did you have any closing thoughts?
I am really happy that you had me here today, Kevin. I really appreciate what you're doing with spreading all that knowledge and information and talking to people. Thanks for having me.
Love having you on. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.